First time I opened my curtains and saw a groundhog sitting on my front steps, staring through the glass, I assumed it was just a random moment. Wild animals do not usually show up at someone's door like that. But when he returned the next morning, and then again after that, I realized this tiny visitor might not be passing through after all. At the time, he was still very young, just a baby groundhog learning about the world around him. He would walk up to the door, tilt his head, and carefully observe everything happening inside the house. Sometimes, he simply sat on the steps for long stretches. In the beginning, I only watched him from inside because I did not want to frighten him away. But after he kept returning day after day, my curiosity finally got the better of me. One morning, I placed some food outside on the steps and stepped back to give him space. He approached cautiously, looked around to make sure everything felt safe, and then started eating.
Hello. No, don't come in, don't come in.
That simple moment became the start of a routine neither of us could have expected. Before long, the groundhog began visiting regularly, and my front steps slowly turned into what I jokingly called a groundhog restaurant. I eventually gave him the name Cutie because it fit him perfectly. Cutie quickly learned that good things happened on those steps. Anytime food appeared outside, he seemed to show up almost immediately. Soon he became completely comfortable around the house, and many mornings I would open the curtains to find him already waiting outside the window. Like most animals, he developed very strong preferences when it came to food. During the summer especially, he could be surprisingly picky. Bananas became his favorite treat. If I offered something else, he would sometimes sniff it and give me a look that made it seem like I had chosen the wrong snack entirely. As time went on, Cutie became part of my daily life. I never imagined a wild animal could feel so familiar, but somehow that is exactly what happened. He kept showing up, and I kept feeding him. Without realizing it, we built a quiet friendship through those simple morning visits. Cutie has been coming around for nearly 4 years now. During that time, I watched him grow from a curious little groundhog into a confident adult. What amazed me most was that he never stopped returning to the same front steps. No matter the season, he always seemed to remember exactly where to go. Then one year, something even more special happened. I began noticing another groundhog wandering around the yard. At first, the newcomer stayed farther away, carefully watching from a distance. It almost seemed like Cutie was showing him that this was a safe place to visit. After seeing Cutie confidently walk up to the door over and over again, the second groundhog slowly became brave enough to do the same. Later, I started calling him Dustin. Watching Dustin learn from Cutie became one of the sweetest parts of the experience. It felt almost as if Cutie was teaching him where to find safety, food, and kindness. Before long, both of them were visiting regularly. But the story did not stop there. Eventually, Cutie found a mate and became a father. Realizing that this little groundhog who once arrived alone now had a family somewhere nearby was unexpectedly emotional. Sometimes I would notice smaller groundhogs moving through the yard and wonder if they were part of his growing family. Over time, even more animals began appearing near the house. Behind my home is a wooded area filled with wildlife, and somehow my front steps became a gathering place for passing visitors. What started as a tiny groundhog restaurant slowly turned into a neighborhood stop for all kinds of animals, from chipmunks to wild turkeys. The funny part is that I live in the suburbs, not deep in the countryside. You would never expect a small wildlife community like this to form here. Yet somehow it happened, and now it feels completely natural. Out of every animal that visits, Cutie has remained the most loyal. He has been coming by the longest, and after 4 years, it is difficult to imagine mornings without him waiting outside the window. Even though I love seeing him, I never forget that he is still a wild animal, living his own life out in the woods. That is part of what makes the connection feel so meaningful. He is free to go anywhere he wants, yet he still chooses to return. Every time he appears on those steps, it feels almost like an old friend stopping by to check in. I also find comfort in knowing that these animals are out there living naturally, just with a slightly safer place to visit and a little extra food when they need it. Sometimes I wonder if Dustin might someday bring his own babies to the yard and continue the tradition. Maybe one day, another tiny face will appear at the window, staring inside with that same curious expression Cutie had years ago.